When thinking of paratroopers of the Second World War, most people would think of British or US airborne troops parachuting into Normandy or the Netherlands, perhaps even the German Fallschirmjäger troops jumping out of aircraft over Crete. But counting the vast amount of land Japan managed to conquer during the war, have you ever considered if they used airborne troops? Well, in fact, they did, and not just through their army. During the war, Japan would fight with paratroopers in operations across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. So what were these troops like? In today's video, we look at the Japanese paratroopers of World War II. If you enjoy this video and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. It's free and really helps the channel reach more history lovers like you. Japan would establish its own para-fighting force following the inspiration of German Fallschirmjäger successes in 1940. Their actions showed not only Japan but the world that soldiers parachuting into combat was a viable and successful way to fight a war. But unlike other countries, Japan's parachutists would be divided into two areas. This was mainly due to the rivalry between the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy. Each fighting force wanted control over their own paratroopers, so establishment of separate units with separate insignia was put into place. The Imperial Japanese Navy created the Naval Marine Paratroopers, which fell under the Special Naval Landing Forces, effectively the Japanese version of Marines. The main objective of these troops was to be used around coastal areas to assault key enemy targets and support Japanese amphibious landings. The unit was founded at the Yokosuka Naval Air Base at Tokyo in 1941. The majority of these troops were young volunteers seeking an alternative to the usual life in the Navy. The Marine Paratroop Force was broken down into the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Yokosuka units, with each consisting of a battalion size of troops of up to 850 men. The naval officers within these units were trained by the army, and the weapons provided to them came from the same source. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Army had their own version of paratroopers. In 1940, the Teishin Shudan, or raiding group, was established in Hamamatsu. This would eventually be turned into a division-sized force of some 5,500 men, and fell under the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. Being a new type of warfare, these army officers studied all they could about paratrooper tactics and the most up-to-date use of weapons in order to train their young soldiers. There's no information to suggest that any Fallschirmjäger troops ever provided training to their Japanese counterparts. The uniforms of both paratroopers would be similar to regular infantry units, with the exception of some padding in their clothing, and in some cases, padded and cut-down helmets similar to German paras. Most weapons were the same, with the exception of a paratrooper version of the Arisaka rifle. This was able to be pulled apart for ease when jumping, and then put back together on the ground. The parachute used was very similar to the Fallschirmjäger chute, but unlike modern-day parachutes, it offered little in the way of maneuverability in the air. Japanese paratroopers across both the Army and Navy wouldn't see widespread deployment during the war. The vast majority of their operations were raiding maneuvers to seize airfields or strategically vital assets. For the Marine troops, they took part in Japan's first ever airborne combat jump during the Battle of Manado in modern-day Indonesia in January 1942. Elements of the 1st Yokosuka had a successful raid, which was followed up by an amphibious invasion by sea. The Marine Paras performed well in the operation and seized their key objective, being a Dutch airfield. They wouldn't have to wait long till their next operation, which took place a few weeks later. This time, the 3rd Yokosuka made their jump near Kupang in West Timor to seize an airbase and deny the Allies a base to deploy aircraft for the defence of Indonesia. The Paras suffered heavy casualties in this operation. For the 2nd Yokosuka, they wouldn't see any combat jumps. Instead, they would be used as an amphibious assault force during the Borneo campaign. The Army Paratroopers would see their first combat jump around the same time in February 1942. This was during the Battle of Palembang on Sumatra, Indonesia, where two parachute regiments were given separate objectives to seize a nearby airfield and two vital Dutch oil refineries. The operation was a great success and showed the Japanese High Command the ability of paratroopers firsthand. April 1942 was slated for the 4th Airborne operation in Burma. Japan was attempting to cut the main withdrawal for Chinese troops along the Burma Road, but extremely bad weather hampered the operation, and the raiding party was called back. This would see the last of any airborne jumps for 1942. Japan continued to create new airborne units and draft in new troops, but found little opportunity to use them. The year ushered in a new defensive strategy, as towards the end, they began to suffer setback after setback as the Allies pushed their way up Southeast Asia. It wouldn't be until 1944 that Japanese paratroopers resumed action. In response to the Allied landings on Leyte in 1944, the Japanese army mounted airborne attacks against American airfields to destroy aircraft as well as supply and fuel depots. The raid resulted in most of their aircraft being shot down by American fire. 300 or so Japanese troops did land and continued with their operation. They managed to inflict casualties and damage to American supplies, but ultimately they were beaten back by the overwhelming American force and suffered huge casualties themselves in this campaign in the Philippines. This would serve as the last airborne operation of the war. Mid-1945 saw a number of planned attacks in the Mariana Islands and at Okinawa, but these were ultimately called off. An attack did occur on Okinawa, but this was undertaken by Japanese commandos, not paratroopers. Ultimately, Japan signed their surrender in September 1945, and this saw the end of the Second World War. What did you think about the Japanese paratroopers of World War II? Were you aware of their use prior to the video? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to expand your knowledge and join the growing Premier History community.